Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And within that world, there have been a few trends and gimmicks that I neither care for nor understand fully. I get why they catch on to some extent. I've even been caught up in a few. Hell, I still remember the first Pokemon craze. Now some of these trends last longer than others, just see the success of Pokemon Go, and some burn out really fast, see Beanie Babies. But certain trends seem to catch on for all the wrong reasons, and lately, the trend that I found particularly frustrating is this idea of subverting expectations. Hell, just saying that out loud makes me cringe like the entire population of Alderaan. And yes, I understand that reference may be in poor taste, but I promise I'm going somewhere with this. This strange narrative concept has become a major buzzword in recent years, but not for good reasons. It became a major talking point after the fan reaction / fan backlash to Star Wars The Last Jedi, and it only intensified with the final season of Game of Thrones. Now, I really don't want to get into the extensive discussions behind those minefields. I'll let the respective fan bases continue to debate that in whatever capacity they see fit. But instead, I want to take a moment to explore this concept in greater detail and highlight how it can be done well and why other attempts have been so misguided and counterproductive. Because while subverting expectations sounds really cunning and creative on paper, it's a very difficult concept to make work. The method seems simple. You take an audience's expectations about a story, build up some narrative tension, and then go in an entirely different direction that changes and enhances the impact of that story. When it works, it's amazing. You're not just momentarily shocked, you're astonished in a way that paints the story in a whole new light. And it makes rewatching or rereading the story that much more powerful. But when it fails, it's just downright toxic to itself and the audience. I would argue that neither Star Wars The Last Jedi nor the final season of Game of Thrones succeeded in that respect. Again, I don't want to get into the details. There are plenty of frustrated fans who have already done that. Instead, I want to highlight one special movie that did succeed in subverting expectations. On top of that, it did so way back in 2010, long before this trend ever became a toxic talking point. That movie is Megamind, a film I've praised before and will likely praise again at some point in the future. There's just so much I can say about this underrated gem of a film, but this is one element to this movie that I feel is more relevant now than it was when the movie came out. Because to date, I've yet to see a movie that has subverted expectations quite as well as this one. The way Megamind goes about this is actually not very subtle, but it's still powerful nonetheless. The subversion is built within the premise of the movie. It asks the question, what happens when the evil genius supervillain actually defeats the handsome square-jawed superhero? What do they do afterwards? And why did they pursue such a goal in the first place? The first 15 minutes of Megamind do an excellent job of setting up a fairly generic premise for a superhero movie. Metro Man is the hero, that's how he carries himself, that's how others see him, and that's how he's perceived in the larger story, at least at first. Conversely, Megamind is the villain. That's how everyone sees him. That's how he sees himself. The prison warden even says it in the opening title sequence. He'll always be a villain. Everything is in place for a traditional hero versus villain struggle. Old concepts like justice, hero worship, and public perception all come into play. It's all overly comedic and very cartoonish, as is often the case with stories involving Will Ferrell, but we all recognize the patterns in play. But then, in the first real battle we see between Megamind and Metro Man, the unthinkable happens. Megamind, despite his grandiose boasting and casual bumbling, defeats Metro Man. It's not framed as some M. Night Shyamalan twist. It's not an attempt to just shock the audience. It's not even a minor plot point either. Hell, this is the plot now. The rest of the movie from here on out is built around this sudden subversion of a standard superhero story. And every event, choice, and character moment stems directly from this subversion. And what makes it work is how this subversion helps tell a different kind of superhero story. It's not just about flipping the script for the sake of novelty. It actually makes the case that superhero narratives are capable of doing so much more than simply having the hero fight and defeat the villain. Throughout the movie, Megamind finds himself playing a part in every overdone trope we've come to expect from superhero movies. He starts off being a villain because that's what he assumes he's meant to be. He grows up in a prison, he learns that being bad is the only thing he's good at, so he just runs with it. He only starts questioning that assumption because, by defeating Metro Man, he finds himself without a greater purpose. But in pursuing that purpose, he finds out that those assumptions had some serious flaws to begin with. Now, they weren't inherently right or wrong on the surface. It was more a matter of digging a little deeper into the concepts of heroes and villains to begin with, finding out that the role he thought was right for him wasn't the role he ultimately wanted. By the end, Megamind still dresses like a villain. He's not nearly as handsome or powerful as Metro Man, but he still chooses to become Metro City's greatest hero. And this subversion of expectations actually works because it's used to build a story rather than just tweak a few key details. Moments like the revelation about Rey's parents being nobodies or Arya Stark killing the Night King had a lot of shock value, but they didn't really factor into the larger plot. Because if someone other than Arya had killed the Night King, it really wouldn't have changed much in terms of how the last few episodes of Game of Thrones panned out. And even if Rey's parents had turned out to be someone important in Star Wars The Last Jedi, it really wouldn't have altered how the events that followed played out. Rey still wouldn't have joined Kylo Ren, and she probably still would have gone on to take down the First Order. Even if we knew at the time that she was the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine, she probably still would have walked the same path. Ultimately, those subversions just felt like elaborate trolling. These details that people thought were important turned out to just be ploys. It comes off as both dishonest and insincere. They might not have been intended as such, but given the fan reactions, I can understand the sentiment to some extent. At times, it felt like both these stories were tempting people to get emotionally invested. Then when the plot just takes a radically different turn, it feels like a slap in the face. If anything, it was downright insulting. Now contrast this with Megamind. At no point does the plot attempt to demean the audience or anyone who enjoys traditional superhero narratives. The subversion is actually in the synopsis, and that same subversion is used to tell a unique story. It fleshes out characters who start out in generic roles, but ultimately walk a different path. This shift never feels forced or contrived, and it's not just done to stand out, because at its core, Megamind uses this concept of subverting expectations to tell a better story than it could have if it had just stuck to a traditional superhero narrative. That's why it works. And unfortunately, that's also why other attempts just keep failing. Whether it's a movie, a TV show, a comic, or a video game, the concept has been used in misguided efforts to just do something radically different. Subverting expectations has become synonymous, and wrongly so, with being bold. But it's not, and it never has been. The importance of telling a compelling, coherent story should never be secondary. Now, I get the importance of trying new things, especially when a genre has been played out in so many other forms. However, doing so does not mean taking an audience's expectations and defying them in a way that feels blatant. At best, it just makes the story confusing, and at worst, it insults the audience and makes them feel denigrated for enjoying that narrative in the first place. Subverting expectations can be done and done well. Megamind is proof of that. It doesn't just subvert expectations for the superhero genre, it dares to build a story around it and have fun with it along the way. It doesn't at all take away from the superhero genre that it parodies. It just uses it as a foundation to tell a truly unique story. No matter how many expectations you subvert, there's just no substitute for a quality story. Megamind gives us that and the undeniable charm of Will Ferrell. That's what makes it so enjoyable. Seriously, if you're a jaded Star Wars fan or Game of Thrones fan, give it a watch. It'll show you how subverting expectations doesn't have to suck all the time. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care and stay safe.